a ban on any real estate transaction, unfriendly country, onerous requirements, permits or the government commission, everything is forbidden, things are not so dire. Many exemptions now, proud owner of some Russian real estate, privileges, day-to-day obligations. How are you going to sell that property? Blocked Type C bank account? You can say goodbye to that one. Hocus pocus. Are you a foreign citizen exploring available options of acquiring real estate assets in Russia? Whether residential or commercial or maybe land plots? Or, on the contrary, are you looking into divesting the real estate that you may already own? In this video, I'm giving an overview of the applicable legal aspects. Given the current political climate, we will specifically focus on the latest restrictions around foreigners dealing with Russian real estate, and we'll find out if by now there are any restrictions left at all. As you may guess, the Russian government originally imposed a bulk of restrictive measures on foreigners a year ago as a result of the tense geopolitical situation. What is at the bottom of it all? Well, the heart of the restrictive regulation has been to deter excessive outflow of funds from the Russian Federation, and expectedly it has affected multiple fields, not only real estate, but also dealings with stakes in Russian companies, bank accounts, money transfers, cash withdrawals, etc. Having endured a hectic and messy way during the last year, ultimately by now the restrictive framework has softened. Especially when it comes to the real estate issues of foreign individuals, I mean physical persons, as opposed to companies. For companies, the regulation is still stricter. And exactly the foreign individuals, not companies, will be in the spotlight of our legal talk today. Predictably, but nonetheless shockingly, the starting point a year ago was effectively a ban on any real estate transaction involving foreigners from certain countries. That is why you might still be finding some unsettling but already outdated info on the web. You should know that by now, exemptions outweigh prohibitions. Despite the remains of panic aura and the feeling in the air that everything is forbidden, these days things are not so dire. In reality, a foreign individual can do the overwhelming majority of the most popular real estate transactions. But nobody knows what's gonna happen tomorrow. Sorry, got carried away. Okay, where was I? What was I saying? Well, later today we will discuss the details. My message to you right now, don't let yourself be confused by the atmosphere of dismay. As concerns the Russian real estate, your hands are no longer tied. Today we will clear the air and bring as much clarity as possible into your do's and don'ts with respect to the Russian real estate. After all, if we, just for a moment, set aside the latest restrictive measures, which are of course the main topic of our discussion today, we shall realize that historically, foreigners have never been excessively restricted in their dealings with the Russian real estate. No unreasonable disparity has ever existed between the real estate rights of foreign citizens and those of Russian citizens. Various title transfer and other registration formalities are pretty much the same, though certain limitations set to guard the Russian public policy have always existed. For example, it is forbidden that foreigners own agricultural land plots or land plots located within borderline zones or seaport areas. That basically means that you can buy a house located on such a land plot, but not the land beneath it. That also implies that as a house owner, you will then be dependent on a landlord's attitude towards you. You will agree that these constraints are not over-the-top discriminatory. In addition, there are military facilities, national parks, cultural heritages, and other facilities of importance, and the lands beneath, for obvious reasons, are hands-off for each and every one, whether a foreigner or a Russian citizen. Imagine you own a real estate asset located in Russia. What would be your day-to-day obligations? Would you have any privileges? Your ownership of Russian real estate will not put you under any obligation to actually live in Russia. Well, no strings attached. You are free to settle down in whatever part of the world you want, or be a citizen of the world. The flip side of it is that the mere fact of owning Russian real estate will not make you a Russian resident for any purposes. Nor does it give you any extra privileges, whether in taxes or in obtaining residence permits. Apart from minor facilitation of the migration process, since with your own apartment, you no longer need to bother about renting one. Of course, once you've become the proud owner of some Russian real estate, you get registered as a taxpayer and will need to annually pay property taxes. The tax rate may differ from region to region and depending on the type of property. residential, commercial, or land plot. In addition, on a monthly basis, utilities and maintenance fees accrue. You are also responsible for your real estate to be properly taken care of. For instance, if a pipe bursts in your apartment at your fault, causing your neighbor's apartments to flood, you might be sued for damages. Not to mention, it is unlikely to have in very close proximity to your dear property the neighbors who will hate you as a result. So if you don't live in Russia, it is prudent to have someone you trust to come and check upon your real estate from time to time. Upon sale of your real estate or upon receiving it as a gift from a stranger, you likely will be subject to a personal income tax at an increased rate of 30% of your income, with little to no possibilities of deflating your taxable income, unless you have owned your real estate for at least 3 years or at least 5 years, depending on circumstances, in which case no income tax upon sale is payable. Or unless you have physically spent in Russia at least 183 days within a year, and thus you have become a Russian tax resident. In this case, the personal income tax rate for you will be only 13% as compared to 30%, and there will be more possibilities for you to reduce your taxable income upon sale for acquisition costs, for example. But let's go back to the main topic of our discussion today, being the latest extraordinary restrictive measures potentially applicable to a foreign citizen dealing with Russian real estate. What are those? What is the scarecrow? It's the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. You may need to obtain a permit of that commission before you fulfill your real estate transaction. Not always, there are many exemptions now. However, the potential need to obtain that permit is a kind of a Damocles sword hanging over certain real estate transactions involving foreigners. Why so? Because for mere mortals, for ordinary people, it is next to impossible to obtain such permits of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. No decision-making criteria are available for general public. Timing is unclear. Well, basically, it all comes down to the Commission's discretion. Most likely, the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments, being an institution heavily overloaded with work these days, wouldn't even bother reviewing individuals' applications for permits and would pure and simple reject. Later today, we will find out which real estate transactions are completely exempt from the requirement to obtain that permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments, and which real estate transactions are only conditionally exempt from that requirement. Getting a little bit ahead of things, the sale of Russian real estate is only conditionally exempt, whereas the remaining minority of the real estate transactions still requiring that permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments are doomed. The nasty thing is that if your real estate transaction happens to be subject to such a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments, without such permit, you cannot complete your real estate transaction. Transfer of title to real estate in Russia and most of the real estate related things are subject to registration in a special register, so-called Unified State Register of the Real Estate Property. Unless you successfully apply with the Russian Real Estate Registration Authority for an entry to be made to that Unified State Register of the Real Estate Property, you are not officially the owner of the real estate in question. Or, on the contrary, you continue as the owner of the real estate, which you no longer want to possess. If by any chance your real estate transaction is unfortunate enough to be subject to a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments, in the absence of such permit, the Real Estate Registration Authority will reject registering the desired transfer of title to the real estate from one person to another, and you'll be left in the lurch. I'll go further than that. The Real Estate Registration Authority might even reject your application for a transfer of title to a real estate asset if they mistakenly come to a conclusion that your transaction requires a permit of the Government Commission for Control of Foreign Investments, whereas in fact, your transaction does not require such a permit, and that's why you haven't bothered obtaining one. The Real Estate Registration Authority might reject just to be on the safe side, when it's not so black and white for them if your particular transaction requires a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. Eventually, you might end up in court trying to force them to register transfer of title to real estate asset in question. At the same time, There are ways, and legal ways, to minimize these risks of not being on the same page with the real estate registration authority. So, when do you need to become vigilant and question yourself? Is my real estate transaction by any chance subject to a permit or the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments? The key red flag is when you yourself is a foreign citizen of a so-called unfriendly country, or when you face as your counterparty a person associated once again with the so-called unfriendly country. But sometimes even the foreign persons associated with other friendly countries are also a risk factor. We'll discuss that later in a separate section. Please use the navigation pane in the description to this video if you need to skip to that section. I have set out the current list of the so-called unfriendly countries in the description to this video. These are mostly the EU member states, the USA, Canada, Japan, the UK, and certain other countries. The complete legal definition of these countries is countries that commit unfriendly actions towards Russia, Russian citizens and companies. In common terms, in the mass media and even on Wikipedia, these countries are often referred to shortly just as unfriendly countries. While no offense meant, I'd suggest we also use the concise version. Otherwise, we will be enjoying each other's company from dusk till dawn and from dawn till dusk, which we in any case will, given the volume of information I'm only too willing to share with you from the top of my heart. If you are yourself a citizen of an unfriendly country, or your counterparty is a citizen of an unfriendly country, or you deal with a company incorporated in an unfriendly country, or making profits there, or even controlled by someone from an unfriendly country, these things are red flags for the purposes of any real estate transaction. No need to become panic-stricken. Calm down. This is indeed a red flag, but it doesn't imply that you are 100% doomed, and your real estate transaction for sure requires the permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. As I said, most of the real estate transactions have by now been exempted. To be fair, irrespective of a real need for a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments, nowadays all real estate transactions involving any foreigners, or even involving Russian companies having foreigners in their ownership chain, may raise suspicions of the Real Estate Registration Authority and be thus, at the time of registration, subjected to a more detailed and scrupulous review than usual. This is something you should anyway be prepared for, document-wise and morally. If you have dual citizenship, Russian citizenship, and simultaneously of any one of the unfriendly countries, then in Russia, Russian citizenship prevails, which means that in Russia you are treated solely as a Russian citizen. What if both of you and your counterparty are foreigners, probably even foreigners from unfriendly countries? What does that mean? One would say, wow, that probably doubles the risk of the need to obtain an unobtainable permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. On the contrary, real estate transactions between two foreigners, even two foreigners from unfriendly countries, have never been touched by the restrictions and do not require a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. Attention! Provided, however, that neither of these foreigners is a Russian resident. You will ask, but how can a foreign citizen at the same time be a Russian resident? The thing is that foreign citizens, and it doesn't matter whether of friendly or unfriendly countries, also become Russian residents if they happen to be lucky owners of a permanent residence permit, so-called in Russian вид на жительство. Any Russian citizen is by default a Russian resident, no matter if he or she hasn't been to Russia in years. Any company incorporated in Russia is also a Russian resident, and it doesn't matter if that company is ultimately controlled by foreigners. To sum up, all Russian citizens and all Russian companies are Russian residents. Certain foreign citizens may also be Russian residents. This concept of Russian residency is very important for our discussion today, and let me be meticulous here. This is the concept of currency residency that we are using today, not to be confused with tax residency, which has other criteria and is a whole different story. So, the greatest risk factor, highlighting at least a potential need to obtain a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments, is when a real estate transaction is concluded between, on the one hand, a foreigner from an unfriendly country, and asterisk, sometimes even from a friendly country, listening further for details, and, on the other hand, a Russian resident, even if such Russian resident is a foreigner himself or herself. And these two parties are intending nothing less than to transfer title to Russian real estate property between each other. Certain real estate dealings have never been affected by the restrictive measures of the last year. In simple words, these real estate issues have never been banned and do not require a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. These unaffected real estate dealings are: first of all, as I already mentioned, any real estate transactions, sale and purchases, gifts, etc. between two foreigners. It doesn't matter, foreigners from friendly or unfriendly countries, neither of whom is a Russian resident, meaning neither of whom holds a Russian permanent residence permit. Secondly, real estate leases, and actually any other real estate transactions not resulting in a transfer of title to a real estate asset do not require a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. However, real estate leases with buyout rights would be quite a different story. Thirdly, inheriting real estate property, or, in contrast, leaving real estate property to the heirs, or succeeding a liquidated company in terms of real estate ownership, and other similar dealings with the Russian real estate that are kind of one-sided. In the fourth place, building a new house, or a new commercial or production building, or any other real estate property from the ground up. Of course, upon finishing the construction, you will need to register your title to that newly built real estate with the Russian Real Estate Registration Authority. But such registration is nothing of the sort requiring a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. However, you need to think ahead. How are you going to sell that property if you need to? Listen further for that. In the fifth place, any real estate transactions involving Russian public authorities or the Central Bank of Russia also do not require a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. However, these real estate dealings that I have just listed and which are untouched by the requirement to obtain a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments might not be your story. In this case, if you are a foreign citizen of an unfriendly country and you are planning on transferring certain Russian real estate assets from yourself to a Russian resident, or vice versa, from a Russian resident to yourself, then unfortunately, as a general rule, this real estate transfer needs to first be approved by the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. Meanwhile, as I've said many times today, the majority of the popular real estate transfers have by now been exempted from this onerous requirement. These exemptions are time unlimited and at the time I'm speaking are still effective and haven't yet been revoked. So, which real estate transfers have been exempted? Which real estate transfers you can do without a prior permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments? First, you are allowed to buy real estate in Russia from whoever you want. Just a small remark. You'd better consider beforehand how likely is it that you might need to sell it anytime soon, and how are you going to do it, and to whom. Second, you are permitted to give real estate as a gift to any individual, any physical person, even if that individual is a stranger to you. Even if he or she is of no blood relation to you. Third, you may gift your Russian real estate to Russian municipal authorities. Thus, in respect of points 2 and 3, you may have noticed that giving your Russian real estate for free to a company, as opposed to an individual or Russian municipal authorities, will still require a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. Fourth exemption, you may receive real estate as a gift or otherwise gratuitously solely from your spouse or your close relatives, such as grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren, full-blood and half-blood brothers and sisters. In other words, receiving real estate as a gift from a stranger will need to be pre-approved by the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. Fifth exemption. At last, you've got the green light for entering into so-called agreements on co-financing of construction activities. By way of these agreements, prospective property owners finance the construction activities, and once the construction is complete, they are entitled to a pre-agreed residential apartment or a pre-agreed commercial property in such newly built building. Figuratively speaking, it's a way for people to book an apartment in a building still under construction through investing the money into the construction activities. Thus, people, to put it simply, exchange the inconvenience of waiting a couple of years before the construction works finish for much lower prices than the prices of the apartments in the already constructed buildings. Please remember that these co-financing agreements are heavily regulated by Russian law, and the agreements themselves need to be registered with the Russian Real Estate Registration Authority. Unless these registration procedures are complied with, you are being dragged into something different and risky, so please be cautious. Once the construction works which you co-financed are officially finished, you do not need any permits of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments to register your title to such newly constructed real estate. Arguably, any transaction, even sale, relating to premises in a building, which building was once, back in the day, built using such co-investment schemes, should also be exempt from the need to obtain a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. That is a very literal and quite venturous interpretation of what the legislation says. No practice yet available. Finally, if you are a foreign citizen of an unfriendly country, you may sell your Russian real estate to a Russian resident without any permits of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments. That's the good news. The bad news is that the purchase price will need to be credited not to any bank account you would like, but to a specific so-called Type C bank account with the Russian bank. Well, Type C bank account is not a fairy tale with a happy ending, but rather a horror movie. That Type C bank account is rubles only and with the Russian bank only. A potential purchaser of your Russian real estate may open a Type C bank account with a Russian bank in your name, even without your presence or any sign-off from you. The frightful thing about Type C bank accounts is that once the purchase price for a Russian real estate is credited into a bank account of that type, you can say goodbye to that money just as well. The money credited to a Type C bank account is no longer available for your personal needs. That money can only be used for a very limited number of purposes, such as paying taxes in Russia, paying bank fees for the servicing of a Type C bank account, buying Russian sovereign bonds, transfers to other Type C accounts, and paying penalties to Russian residents under certain specific loan obligations, and let's call it a day. At the very least, when reviewing an application for registering transfer of title to a Russian real estate property in favor of a purchaser, the Russian Real Estate Registration Authority will always check that the sale and purchase agreement contains the details of your Type C bank account where the purchase price needs to be credited to. At most, the Russian Real Estate Registration Authority might request a bank transfer order confirming that the purchase price has actually been paid to your Type C bank account, rather than just stated on paper. However, it's highly questionable whether the Real Estate Registration Authority has a right to request such confirmation. After all, you and the purchaser may have agreed that the purchase price needs to be paid only after the registration procedures are complete. The requirement to receive purchase price for your Russian real estate into a blocked Type C bank account must seem unappealing to you, and this is understandable. At the same time, I should mention that there is an absolutely legal loophole for those foreign citizens of unfriendly countries who are also Russian residents, meaning who have a Russian permanent residence permit. These foreign citizens of unfriendly countries / simultaneously Russian residents can sell their Russian real estate without any need to receive the purchase price into those mortifying Type C bank accounts. The hocus pocus here is that Type C bank accounts are not destined, not fit for residents in what concerns the purchase price for Russian real estate. In practice, this is a rare scenario that a foreign citizen of an unfriendly country is also a Russian resident, and the Russian Real Estate Registration Authority comes across these cases not so often. And in order for you to avoid unjustified rejection at the time of registration, you'd better approach the Russian Real Estate Registration Authority rather indirectly through an experienced notary or a bank specializing in real estate transactions. If you are a citizen of a friendly country, then congratulations! In terms of real estate deals in Russia, you have not been incapacitated, your rights have not been diminished. In other words, no need for a permit of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments, no need for Type C bank accounts, but for one hitch. The status of a person associated with an unfriendly country is, figuratively speaking, contagious. You might have become sort of infected with that status as concerns your real estate rights. How? If you acquired after the 22nd of February 2022 or plan on acquiring in the future any Russian real estate property from a person associated with an unfriendly country, then in respect of that particular Russian real estate property, you kind of inherit the status of a person associated with an unfriendly country. That means that any further transfers of that particular real estate property might be subject to permits of the Government Commission for Control over Foreign Investments unless exemptions apply. So please scroll back and listen to the information for foreign citizens of unfriendly countries as if you were yourself a citizen of an unfriendly country. Another recommendation for everyone, no matter whether you're from friendly or unfriendly country, don't forget to check who your counterparty in a real estate transaction is. Are there any deterrents to the transaction on his side? Does he need to receive purchase price to a Type C bank account, etc.? The state of things will be even more complicated for you if you happen to deal in your real estate transaction with a company. First of all, companies associated with unfriendly countries are under more stringent restrictive rules than citizens of unfriendly countries. And in this video, we have primarily discussed the state of things applicable to the citizens of unfriendly countries. Secondly, unless you have investigated the ownership chain of the company you are dealing with up to the ultimate beneficial owners, you never know if the company you are dealing with is a company associated with an unfriendly country. As a matter of fact, even a company incorporated in the Russian Federation may turn out to be a company associated with an unfriendly country. Last but not least, there are many more issues you should look at when planning your real estate deal. Tax optimization, currency control issues, can you pay cash, are there any effective limits on transferring money abroad from the Russian Federation, can you receive purchase price directly to your bank account with a foreign bank, and many other. I wish you good luck.